Ladies and gentlemen, we'll have more people coming to join us as we go, but welcome to our Better Angels National Member Call for the month of August. As you may have noticed, I'm not Donna Murphy, generally speaking. Donna, our lead organizer at Better Angels, does a fabulous job of moderating and hosting, I should say, these meetings. I will do my feeble best to hold to her level of excellence in this call. But I'm very excited because we have a terrific guest who will be joining us today, who we will introduce in just a moment. Before we do, however, I want to turn things over to our wonderful Georgia State Coordinator, Ms. Barbara Brown, to get us going with some ground rules and some opening remarks. So, Barbara, will you take us away?
All right. So I'm Barbara, and I am co-coordinator in Georgia, and I want to welcome each and every one of you to the Better Angel Member Call. It's a monthly call for all members. And before we begin, I want to review two technical matters. First, with the exception of the speakers, all members will be muted for the entirety of the call. Only the speakers are visible by video. Second, the call will include a question and answer session. If you're joining by Zoom video, you can ask a question at the bottom of your screen by typing in your question. We have some members who are joining by phone, but only if you join by computer can you ask questions and answers, or questions. Now I'm going to read the Better Angel missions and then hand it over to my Better Angel colleague, John Wood. Okay, Better Angels is an organization uniting red and blue Americans in a working alliance to depolarize America. As individuals, we try to understand the other side's point of view, even if we don't agree with it. In our communities, we engage those we disagree with, looking for common ground and ways of working together. In politics, we support principles that bring us together rather than divide us.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, Barbara. And that sets the table. And so, without much further ado, we'll move into the main part of our evening here. Introducing, first of all, our interviewer. You know him as, well, Mr. David Blankenhorn, president of Better Angels. You know him, you love him, or at the very least, you tolerate his general sort of, presence as best as we can. David will be interviewing Mr. Robert Fersh, who is the president and founder of the Convergence Center for Policy Resolution. Robert's organization is unique. It does fantastic work. He's based in Washington, D.C., and we're very privileged to get the opportunity to hear him speak in some depth about the work that Convergence does. And so without any further delay, David, Robert, thank you both for being here to have this conversation. And yeah, we look forward to hearing what you guys have to talk about.
Great. Thanks, John. Hey, Bob. How you doing? You founded the Convergence Center for Policy Resolution in, I think it was 2009, right? You and some colleagues. And yes. Before that, sorry, go ahead.
Saying we're celebrating our 10th anniversary.
Yeah, congratulations.
Thank you.
Before that, I know that you were involved in something called Search for Common Ground, which was an internationally focused conflict resolution organization. Is that more or less how you would say it?
That's the mission of Search for Common Ground, but
yeah.
Basically what I did there was incubate.
Okay.
Convergence and work. I headed up their U.S. operations and focused on building consensus on big national policy issues.
Okay. So I guess I want to start by asking you, what draws you to this work? Is there something about your own life or story, or there's something about a book you read or something that kind of got you to feeling like you might want to put in a few decades on this issue of bringing people who disagree together to try to do something fresh or different. What is it about you that kind of got you into this?
Thanks, David. First, even before I try to answer that, first, thank you for the opportunity to be here tonight with all of you. Congratulations on what you are doing collectively, David. Congratulations on your leadership. What I think you're doing is tremendously important, and we are doing work that's utterly complementary, as you and I have discussed before.
Sure.
So I really look forward to the conversation, and
Right.
I applaud everybody putting energy into this. You know, I've been asked this question a number of times. I answer it sometimes flippantly, like, what else do I need to say? I'm the middle son with sisters on either side. Of course, I'm into resolving conflicts.
Right.
But it turns out, I think at some level, I've always been a mediator at heart. And as you know, my career spans many years in Washington, where I was an advocate. I was an advocate leading what is considered the leading advocacy group on the issue of hunger in America, a progressive advocacy group. I worked for 3 congressional committees, and generally with an opinion. But at some level, eventually, after all the years in Washington, I couldn't live with the cognitive dissonance of meeting people of great decency who cared about solving problems and disagreed on how to do so. And it struck me as a tragedy that people were talking past each other, had no place to actually hear each other. So it's really, I'm a mediator at heart. You know, at some level, I think you begin to internalize that it's important to give people the benefit of the doubt. And it's also important to stay open to the fact that no matter how smart you are or how well versed you think you are, you know, it requires you to be a little bit humble about what you know, and that you can always learn from other people. So that was my experience, you know, operating more in progressive circles and then meeting people of great decency who wanted to deal with the issues I was dealing with, hunger in America. In fact, 2 of the people who have served on the board of Convergence over the last decade, I met debating them 12 years ago. They were conservatives, I was a liberal on the issue.
On the food issue?
Yeah, on the hunger issue. We debated each other, but we went out for coffee afterward, became friends. I learned a lot from both of them.
Yeah. I had a similar experience with, I was involved in the whole gay marriage issue for some time, and I was debating Jonathan Rauch. And now he's on the board for Better Angels and really a wonderful friend. So I had a little bit of that myself. But there was nothing in your childhood. I mean, you were saying it, you had 2 sisters and were a mediator, but you don't think there was not, in other words, it sounds to me like it was more of a intellectual journey, meeting people and sort of feeling as though you saw a problem intellectually with people of goodwill not being able to to work together.
I don't think it's just intellectual. It's an emotional issue. It's seeing people suffering because of the disconnect. I mean, part of my origin story is that I was raised to care about these issues. I was raised in a synagogue in Poughkeepsie, New York, with a rabbi who escaped the Nazis from Berlin in the late 30s. And I didn't know if he was a Republican or Democrat, but he imbued in us a sense that we had a responsibility to make the world a better place. So that was very much a passion of mine. I wanted to make the world a better place. But ultimately what I came to, and you come to it at different points in your life, everybody, is it wasn't just what I fought for, but who you are as you do it and how you do it becomes important. And all the great traditions teach you it's more important about how we treat each other than exactly how right or how smart you are about knowing all the answers, because nobody knows all the answers. And the dangers of that, of people thinking they know all the answers, is very evident in the world today. So we've internalized that having people of different points of view talk to each other and push their thinking to each other's thinking to a higher level creates actually better answers and better relationships in the process.
Yeah, that's good. Well, I want you to just say a little bit about your model, because at Convergence, because at Better Angels, as you know, we bring together people who don't agree about politics to try to hear one another, see where there may be some common ground, some shared values, kind of rediscover civic bonds that otherwise you just get lost in the world of divisiveness that we're in. But we have not focused primarily on working together to find answers to specific policy questions. We're getting into that a little bit, but it's not really the main, it's not kind of our DNA. It seems to me that it convergence, that it's your DNA. Like this is what you do. And you, as I understand it, you're bringing people together, maybe would you call it the grass tops level, who really don't agree, to see if they can get a fresh purchase. So I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but just talk about your model for a minute. Talk about how it actually works, what you're doing.
Yeah, well, thanks, David. Let me give you more of a thumbnail sketch, and we can go into depth. We've got materials on the website, and I should say we've actually, in the last year, enlarged our mission to help inspire and help others, assist others to do this kind of work. It's actually not rocket science. Most people, when they hear it, say, "Gosh, that's pretty direct. Why didn't somebody think of that before you did, Fersh?" So let me give you the basic elements of it. And let me just be clear that even though I'll give you some principles, every project's different. It's not a clear cookie cutter. So much is based on, human relationships and the unpredictable nature of that. But here's how it goes. First, you have to identify a problem. And then if you want to get people to work together on a problem, you got to have them all agree there is a problem. You don't have to agree on what the solutions are. Of course, that's what the debate is. But you have to agree there's a problem. Now, we've done big projects on K through 12 education, teachers unions and charter schools working together, economic mobility, big companies and worker advocates working together, nutrition and wellness, big food companies, even Pepsi sitting with consumer advocates. But in each case, the goals were the same. In the nutrition project, it was how do we deal with obesity and diabetes? And eventually, we came to a framing, and that would be the next point. So you identify an issue. We then, when we think we have an issue that has ripeness and seems appropriate and meets our standards of having national consequence, we normally will.
How do you identify the issues? How do you find it?
It's just somewhat arbitrary, really. There's no shortage of issues we're divided on. So it could be a staff member, a board member. Increasingly, people come to us.
Right.
Criteria, you name it. There's lots of issues begging for us to address them, but we've already addressed about 10 in our 10-year history. And these are usually big national policy issues, although increasingly now we're working at the state level, so we can talk about that. So look, you identify an issue, you test it. Normally we bring together a few people who are leaders with different points of view. Does this sound like an issue to take on? Then we do our research. We'll interview, in some cases, 50 or 100 people to create a map of who believes what. Where are the areas of principle no one will ever agree on? Where are the areas of potential common ground? And in that process, we get to know key players in the field. And we build trust with us that we're honest brokers. And we begin to see who is it that if we could bring them to the table, could move the dial.
So maybe two or 3 months of interviews or something like that?
Yes, it could be 2 to 4 months of interviews. It depends how much money we have, how many people we can deploy, how quickly we can move.
Right.
And sometimes we do that and we're still waiting to raise the rest of the money and we just keep talking to people. And then you ask what level. I mean, I would say we try to operate at a leadership level. It could be, you could call it grass tops. I've been involved running projects with very high level people on US Muslim relations like Madeleine Albright and Dennis Ross and members of Congress. In other cases, we might have senior execs from companies or nonprofits and maybe not even the heads of it. As long as we feel that they collectively can move their organizations toward working together on the solutions. We've done very high level healthcare work with top officials from all the different constituencies. So you identify an issue, you research the heck out of it, you create a map of who believes what, you figure out who needs to talk to whom. You then assemble a table. Usually for us, somewhere between 20 and 30 people is manageable. We bring in usually outside facilitators, some of the country's best facilitators, and we engage in a structured dialogue over usually a year to 18 months with oftentimes maybe 6 two-day meetings. We try to have people come in for 2 days.
Face-to-face?
Face-to-face. Important to be face-to-face. There may be subgroups that meet in between. There may be conference calls, but face-to-face is where the magic happens. And, you break bread, you sleep on things. Now, sometimes we have projects where it's just a one-day meeting. They're all in DC, but normally we bring in people around the country. And one of the important things I left out is we need to eventually, after we create that map of who believes what, is we need to frame the issue in a way that everybody feels invited in. that they feel like it's being framed in a way it's not biased. So when we started to work on economic mobility, the original framing was inequality. And it turned out a number of people, particularly on the right, kind of conflated inequality
Yeah.
with redistribution. And so mobility was actually a term everyone could agree with. How do we restore the American dream?
Yeah. It seems to me, I was just struck with this because it seems to me that, to me, in some of the work I've done, that's been the most important phase of the process, asking the right question in the right way. If you don't get that right, nothing else is going to work. So the idea of what you're calling framing, it seems to me like, wow, sort of like, I don't know, do you resonate with that idea that that's sort of like the fundamental precondition for success is to get a framing that people can all buy into?
Yeah, and it's not always so difficult. Sometimes the framing is general enough that everyone says, yeah, we want quality education for all kids.
Right.
Who agrees with that?
Right.
But, you know, there are times when the framing, like when we did nutrition and wellness, eventually the framing became, how do we create market forces to create better diets? We decided we weren't going to deal with soda taxes, for instance, although we could have. But the common ground that people agreed on was, yeah, how do we make sure we educate people and incentivize them and create a market for food companies to actually want to sell healthier foods?
Yeah.
And then comes a virtuous cycle, them investing, and the more you reinforce the buying your healthier foods, then you create a virtuous cycle. So
right.
That's an important framing to have the food companies come to the table, and the consumer groups, although it wasn't their full agenda, felt great. If you can get the food companies to operate in a way that they feel incentivized to create better, foods and invest in better marketing and not advertise for bad foods, that would be a huge step forward. So anyway, to complete the cycle, after the research, the framing, you convene people in a dialogue skillfully with ground rules. You begin to create an arc of meetings where you understand what issues need to be dealt with in what sequence, and eventually you begin to negotiate, if you will, or identify creatively solutions that work for everybody. And you bring that to a head, and sometimes there's negotiations amongst leading, adversaries. We take them aside, we use our skilled facilitators, but normally we find powerful areas of common ground, even though people agree to disagree on a lot of stuff, but we find big areas of common ground, and then we hold them to the table to create a plan of action, shared plan of action, that what are they going to do? What commitments are they going to make to move those ideas forward? They could be legislative, it could be market-based changes in businesses, it could be changes in research and philanthropic priorities, it could be public-private partnerships, whatever the table thinks will be most effective. So that's the process in a little bit more than a nutshell.
Yeah, that's really great. And the people involved, in a sense, are not speaking only as individuals, they're participating as representatives of organizations that will be expected to somehow participate in the follow-up, right? Is that true?
It's partially true. That's our gold standard. And whenever possible, we'd like to come and sometimes they can't speak for the organization until the organization sees what we come up with. In some cases, we've had mainly individuals sign on, but they come from such reputable organizations that it's still a very strong product to have people from those organizations.
Sure.
But the gold standard is to have someone sign on behalf of their institution, have their institution put the resources behind it.
Yeah, wow. Well, I know from knowing you and reading about the organization that you've had some really, you've had an impact. The work you do is very respected, and I think many people would call it kind of the gold standard of this kind of collaborative activity. I feel that way. I'm wondering, though, what's the biggest weakness or in the model? What's the weakest link for you? The thing that causes you the most effort to try to deal with?
Well, there's a couple. I mean, we in struggling nonprofits, some of it is just to get the resources to get started.
Yeah.
Foundations are slow to come in, and
yeah.
So when we were researching, we don't have the table together. It's tough without a whole cloth. Who are you guys to do it? On the other hand, we've had healthcare leaders, and I'm even getting approached by some state leaders now, say, can you come in? And I will say, help raise the resources. But to be more direct about your question, so far, the problem hasn't been so much about getting agreement. The biggest challenge is to try to make sure you have impact. Now, in every project we've had major areas of common ground. And one of the things we haven't focused enough on, and there's recently been a blog about us put out by PACE,
Yeah.
for
Yeah, I saw that. Jonathan Gruber wrote a nice piece. Yeah.
So a big part of our magic is we build relationships of trust, and that allows people to find the common ground. And without fail, we build relationships. I'd love to tell you a couple stories of people who are formerly sort of sworn enemies who now are working together because they saw each other's humanity. So there's all these what we call ripple effects afterward of people.
We call those better angel stories, but in your world, it's a convergence story. Yeah.
Yeah. So yeah, we're on the same path. So all that's great. They see each other differently. They call each other up differently. We can't always control, though, exactly when Congress might act, or we can't always necessarily assure that even though people leave the room, excited about their ideas, that the implementation will be easy. So if it's changes in corporate practices, how do you move that dial forward? Or if it's changes in public education. So I'm just acknowledging that although we've had every project, we've influenced congressional debate on a series of issues. We've had major changes in companies' practices and their employment practices based upon our dialogues. We've had initiatives that have had convenience stores shift how they offer food offerings at the checkout counter and so on. I would say the biggest hurdle is what we all face is how do you make sure that all that collective will over time translates into sustained action on the issue.
Right.
And I can't say that in every case we've had all the impact we want. I do want to mention one thing though. Our flagship program was on K through 12 education. It was a very high level group, presidents of the national unions, charter school networks, school administrators. When they were done, they were so excited about the vision they formed for what they call learner-centered education. They asked Convergence if we would staff them to take these ideas out into the world. And we did for nearly 3 years. And then we spun them off as an independent nonprofit that's operating this year, I think, at over $2 million a year, taking these ideas out to school districts and learning environments throughout the country. So literally hundreds and hundreds of places around the country are beginning to adopt these transformative ideas about what K through 12 could look like. And for those interested on the call, if you go and Google Education Reimagine, you can learn about this enormous impact this group is having that came out of our consensus project.
That's great. That's really great. Well, the last question I want to ask before we open it up to people to ask their own questions is that ask you to look in the crystal ball a minute. I know it's probably something neither one of us really want to do, but let me press you a minute. As you look at the situation today in the country, the level of divisiveness, the level of rancor in our political discussion, just as you see the situation overall in terms of the state of our political discourse in the country. And obviously, our two organizations are doing what we can to push in a different and we think better direction. But when you just look at things, do you feel in the next year or two or three, do you have a sense that you don't know what that's going to happen, that it's likely to get worse in terms of the divisiveness that we're facing, or that there could possibly be some changes that we could see in the country that would take us in a different direction? Do you have a sort of any feeling about how things are likely to go in the next year or two?
David, my standard line would be to say I can say definitively that I don't know.
Yeah.
Well, let me say this. I'm forever an optimist. I do believe that people of great decency are upset with where the country is. I think it's good people caught in bad systems. One thing that I didn't mention is in the last 9 months, we've been invited to work with a 28-member caucus of the House, a bipartisan working group, 14 Rs, 14 Republicans, 14 Democrats. And when we convene them or hold a retreat with them, these are people of great decency. You have, a former sheriff from one state sitting next to a member of the Black Caucus, and you close your eyes as they talked about the issues. I couldn't necessarily tell who was a Republican, who were a Democrat. So the more we do the kind of dialogues that we're doing, I think it's essential. There's other groups also working on how our electoral systems sometimes elect, more partisan people, and there are reforms people are working on. I believe we're ripe for a lot of people of decency, religious leaders, people who are mediators, people who are therapists, people who get this. I mean, I think there's a whole well of goodwill that could be marshaled to turn it around. I can't make any predictions how quickly that might happen, but I would say that the maelstrom we've been on, especially heightened by the last few years, I think has radicalized people. And my concern is that some people are radicalized to try to return the fire with the fire. And that's where we have to come in.
I see a lot of that.
So
we've tried being nice. We've tried being nice, but it's not working. Now we have to really suit up.
Well, I think then it gets down to what kind of country do you want to be? What kind of people do we want to be? And where's the lasting change going to be? And so we do need leaders. And I'm hoping there will be leaders who will emerge. And I believe that a leader who speaks this language can be elected under the right circumstances. And of course, no one leader is going to transform everything. There's a lot of other systemic change. But I do believe that cultures can change. And I've seen that things that you didn't think were possible, waves of cultural change and idea change, whether it was the environmental movement or whether it was the gay marriage movement and so on. I believe that things can change rapidly. So I remain optimistic that under the right circumstances, things will get better. And I also am, I think, very sober about the fact that you and we are small antidotes to some larger forces. And so we have to begin to engage and figure out how to move those larger wheels, the tectonic plates, to try to get us back to where we need to be.
Yeah.
I'm not wise enough to know exactly how to do that.
Yeah. Well, of course I am. And I could explain it to you if you just could give me a few minutes.
Maybe after the call, that would be
great. I'll just lay it right out.
Yeah.
No, that's great. I really appreciate it. And I think I personally really admire the work that you were doing at Convergence, and I would like to learn from it as we develop our own chops at Better Angels to kind of get our toes wet in thinking about how we can address issues of policy, and also have a more collaborative relationship. The different initiatives and movements out there that are not doing the same thing, but doing similar enough things that perhaps we could, just learn from one another more systematically. I'd like to do that.
Well, we feel the same way, and I'll just say with your members listening that to the extent you're interested in, we think our model applies in communities and neighborhoods, towns, counties, states. It's got to be modified and adapted, but we're happy to share what we know, and if people are interested, we have materials, and if we need to do a little more hands-on helping, we'll try to do that. We have limited resources, but we're trying to develop that capacity because we want to have these ideas go out into the world. And I think one important point is that people do not get this usually too well until they experience it.
Right.
So let me just tell you one. We got a lot of stories. I'll tell you one quick story about our education group. We had a woman who's a libertarian who has a conservative foundation in California, and we matched her up with a very senior official of a national teachers union as a dialogue table. And of course, they both came in skeptical of each other. One had normally gone to conferences where teachers unions were being blamed for the state of American education, and the other was, upset with all these school reformers who didn't know what it was like to be a teacher. Well, they've emerged as dear friends from this process. They've gone on speaking engagements together. They understand each other. They feel deeply enriched by each other. And they no longer are demonizing each other and talking about each other's, organizations the way they might have, 3 years ago.
Yeah.
That's just
great.
That's a Better Angel story, and it's a Convergence story.
Yeah. Yeah, it is. It is. Well, thank you. Well, let's open it up. I think Wendy and Tom have worked out a system to let Rob address some questions from our members. So let me turn it over to the two of you.
Indeed. On to you, Wendy. Wendy is an organizer from Northampton, Massachusetts, by the way. And we're very happy to have her with us today to help facilitate our Q&A. And let me just say very quickly that very encouraged by the conversation we just listened to. So for anybody who wants to ask a question, once again, go to the Q&A box, type it in. But I think we have a couple in the queue to start off with. So Wendy.
Hi, I'll start with the very first question, which is from Margaret Babcock. She would like to know if there's a lobbying arm of your organization where issues are taken directly to legislators and politicians.
So thank you for that question. And the answer is no, we do not lobby. In fact, in order to preserve the trust of everybody into the future, we do not actually take positions for or against what our groups come up with. Our model is to empower and bring together the people who are the powers that be on the given issues and sort of transform how they work from conflict into working together. And so the lobbying and advocacy is done by them. Now, we will help issue reports, we'll put out information on behalf of the stakeholders, and we will communicate with Congress if invited and observing the laws against lobbying and so on. But we're not a lobby group. And if we became a lobby group, then we become associated with certain positions, and then people wouldn't trust us next time around. We're truly neutral. So that's what we do. But our goal is to take the powers that be on healthcare and have them go and move these ideas forward that they find where they find common ground, or any other topic.
I see. So the participants do the lobbying, not the organization itself.
That's right. We are a policy neutral organization by design.
I'm sorry, could you say that again?
By design, we're a policy neutral organization. We do not take policy positions. We will help spread the reports, spread the knowledge, let people know about these reports, and let them know what the stakeholders, they are the experts on the issues. We're not. We're Convergence. We're a convening organization whose expertise is getting people to find powerful areas of common ground and kind of trying to reconfigure how they work together so that they work in concert to solve problems rather than in conflict.
Great. So we have another question on a slightly different aspect from Mike Lewinsky. He would like to know if your framing approach has been informed at all by George Lakoff, who has written extensively about this, and if so, are there any works of his that you could recommend?
I think the answer is that I read some of Lakoff's work many years ago. I can't say that we are directly dependent upon what he wrote. I think at this point, we're relying very heavily on 10 years of experience and a dozen projects or so where we've learned how to do this. We've also worked very closely with a group out of Cambridge, Massachusetts called the Consensus Building Institute, where we ordinarily find our facilitators. And they are experts in looking at how to assess and frame up issues. So we work closely with them. Whether they're grounded in Lakoff, I don't know. But offhand, I don't have a particular book or approach to suggest to you. I myself am much more of an experiential learner than a book reader, but there may be other members of our staff who are enamored of Lakoff, and I'd be happy to look into that.
Okay, thank you. I am scrolling down here. I know there's another question. Yes. So your work is what you might call grass tops instead of grassroots. Is there a role for individuals to be involved in your organization?
Yeah, great question, and it's a difficult one for us in that we've been designed to try to take advantage of bringing together people who have the collective knowledge, experience, and influence to move the dial on a particular issue. So we have diversity at our table. We will bring in people from community levels, so people with knowledge of an issue from a community level, a community college head, or someone who works in an employment program somewhere, or we've brought in formerly incarcerated people to sit at our table. But for the average person, the way to get involved is to come to a leadership council meeting we have, or to get on our mailing list, or to become a contributor, or to even write to us or suggest ideas or places where to take our work. But we are a nonprofit that at this point does not involve average citizens in the day-to-day process. I would say one thing that we're intrigued by, and it's very difficult to create this coordination, would be over time trying to develop a capacity where we could, at the same time that we're meeting with top leaders, test the ideas with citizens. And we've had conversations with a lot of civic engagement groups to try to coordinate that. It's a difficult thing to do, timing-wise and expense-wise, but we do believe that the voice, the collective wisdom of citizens is important. And in many cases, we involve groups that have major networks of people across the country that inform their positions. So we look for that. But in terms of actually getting involved in our work as just someone interested, it's more a matter of following us. We open the door to what we call leadership council meetings 3 times a year, or letting us know if you have a skill set. There are committees we have on communications and other matters where people can get involved.
You know, Rob, I want to just say what we're getting involved with now at Better Angels is we have the local groups, we call them alliances, and they meet monthly, and a lot of them, a lot of them want to get involved in policy discussion, and they want to develop their chops on this issue of trying to work out policy ideas. And we have a rule that before anything like that happens, it has to be adopted by large majorities of both red and blue members. And there's a structure to make sure that it really is bringing people together across the differences. And we're just beginning the process. And the idea is that citizens at the local level might be able to do something that our political leaders are increasingly seem to not be able to do, which is to actually come together to think about things in creative ways. So there's it's analogous to what you do at a higher leadership level. And so I'm wondering, there could be ways that maybe our alliances could learn from what you're doing, or get some, we don't envision a 2-year process, but we do envision a structured process that requires interviewing stakeholders. It's a little bit it's pretty analogous, and we're trying to figure out, some of the alliances are really trying to think through how this could happen in a way that has real integrity.
So Dave, let's have a conversation. We've actually done some training. Last year, we went to a conference of the Jewish Council of Public Affairs, and they had their local chapters, and because they thought they might want to become conveners. But it's very important that the conveners, and you guys would meet this, be neutral.
Right.
I would say this. One thing for your members to think about is not to write off local leadership, but to talk to, a city manager or a county official or Congress to say, why don't you convene people? Make it a consensus process. So if you don't agree with it, it's okay. You're not facing criticism, but bring people together. And we're happy to share what we know. We're not the only people in the world who know how to do this, but we have probably taken it as deep and far as almost anybody.
Yeah.
And we're happy to help you think through what skill sets.
Yeah, it's analogous, because we are not going to take positions as Better Angels. We're not going to lobby, and we're not going to say we endorse this or that, because if we did, at least half our members would disagree and not like that. But so we're trying to figure, it's a similar line that you're trying to develop of how you do this with integrity, in a truly bipartisan way. And yet we're doing it more at the kind of community level, but I think there's some ways to learn from what you're doing.
So let me just, one caution on this to your members is that you got to have some skin in the game. You got to have some heart to do this. A lot of work to become, the parlance of collective impact, a backbone organization. But if you have, maybe start with a few communities where people have an issue they want to take on. I agree, you don't have to be 2 years. Of local issue, you may know who the stakeholders are pretty well. You need to make sure you hear them out and frame it up well. but we could, work with a few of your groups and maybe test this out and see what you can do.
Yeah.
We want this to spread virally, so you guys would be a wonderful partner.
Yeah.
We can test these ideas, and we can, within limits, provide some pro bono help, and then if it takes a lot of our time, then maybe we get it, and we'll try to help you.
Yeah, great. Sorry, Wendy, back over to you.
I'm sorry if I might sound a bit disconnected, but I suddenly, you're all fading out and I can't hear you, even though my volume is turned all the way up. So I will read a question from Dennis Wong. He says, your approach seems to be top-down and market-driven, and that could result in evolutionary solutions rather than revolutionary structural change, which could be what's needed sometimes. And he wondered if you could comment on that.
Yeah, I think the answer is that his assumptions are not necessarily so. Yeah, we do try to evolve top leaders, but when we put together an education table, we had a New York City principal. We had the teacher of the year from Nebraska. We had a charter school principal from Houston. Eventually we brought young people to the table. So yes, it's an elite group, but we hope to have all the perspectives represented. And in the case of Education Reimagined, they actually view what they came up with as transformational. It's a whole nother model of the 19th century model we've had of factory-based education. So our model can produce, I think, visionary, transformative responses. In some cases, it's compromises. In some cases, just some really creative problem solving that no one can get to the solutions. So we're open to any, all approaches, and we've had facilitators of different skill sets to try to figure out how wide and broad people want to go. I mean, it's tough enough just to get people to get to a common table. Selling some process of revolutionary change isn't so easy for people. And some people are by nature radical incrementalists, and other people want the big change. And I don't think there's a right or wrong answer. I myself have been part of both. And I think it depends on the issue and the circumstance. But what we try to do is find the people with the collective intelligence and will who can move the dial. We can't have a perfect table. We can't have 3,000 people talk about it. We have to make smart choices, and each table could be constituted differently. But at least I think in our favor, we've always, we get diverse voices. We get people who disagree. We get people who represent, most of the major points of view, and we have them push each other as hard as they can to develop the best answers they can have. Many of which are very creative, and some of which are seen more as compromises, which is not a dirty word for us.
Right. So even though you are dealing with opinion leaders, that doesn't rule out some pretty revolutionary solutions that people come up with.
Absolutely. There are times when something's ripe, and sometimes we say, forget about the present, move 10 years into the future. Let's reimagine something. Let's rethink this. We're looking at potentially a new project on voting. We're not ready to launch it yet, but one of the areas we're looking at, maybe we should look 10, 15 years down the road. What should our voting systems look like? Not just try to tinker with the edges with all the threats coming in. So we're open to this, and we actually open to suggestions from any of your members about how to do it better. They got ideas, things we should look at. I think the basics are that you have to figure out who needs to talk to whom. If you want to get a revolutionary answer, then you assemble people who think in those ways, or you facilitate them to do that. But we have to listen to the will of the people. And in the education project, people were so fed up with the status quo, and they felt that the current system couldn't be on the edges really corrected. It was designed wrong. We no longer have to teach all the children of the same age, the same thing, at the same time, in the same place. We've had a revolution in technology and in understanding how kids learn that we needed to redesign it. And that's what that group did. And I think if you read it, you'll see that it's really quite revolutionary.
We have another question from Bruce France, and he says he's a libertarian, and he says he's interested in finding solutions that do not require yet more legislation. And he asks, do you often come up with solutions that would require eliminating or changing laws rather than adding new ones to allow more freedom of choice, which often provides solutions?
I think the answer to that is that we have any number of projects that aren't public policy or legislative. So our nutrition and wellness was all about how business practices could change, working with public health officials. There was no legislation with that. We did a project on U.S.-Pakistan relations. It was all about building connective tissue across people. I would say, in answer to his question, that we don't start with a precondition about we need more laws, we need less laws. Certainly in our economic mobility discussion and in our research on a potential housing project, there's a lot of interest in deregulation of certain things or scaling back some things that get in the way of economic growth or opportunity, or making housing cheaper and so on. So what we do is we try to assemble people from libertarian to whatever the opposite is, and have them go at it and push each other's ideas, and we look for the consensus. For us, the consensus is what Bill Urey calls higher ground. We're not trying to get the mushy middle, although sometimes that happens. We're trying to push each other's thinking to another level. And more often than not, people emerge with something that they're actually pretty excited about. That's our gold standard. Not that they're, milk toast about it. They're actually excited about it. But if everyone agrees it's even better than the status quo, then people will work for it. So I don't have a neat answer. And we don't have a precondition about more or less regulation, but it's often on the table given the stakeholders we have who think that there's too many laws and regulation get in the way, and then they have to answer the people who think it's a good idea to have it, and they push each other's thinking, and they often find solutions that actually work for both.
That sounds great. So we have a couple of questions about specific issues. Whether you've been involved in anything regarding the gun rights, gun control issue. And another person was interested in whether you've taken on anything related to abortion and how either of those two have gone.
Two really simple,
Right.
not charged issues. Let me deal with the gun issue first. We're actually researching that now. And we think we may have a handle on how to have some good conversations, and we're seeking resources to go even deeper and do some more interviews. We're not sure. This is a difficult issue, as you all know. And the framing goes back to David. The framing on this is really important, whether it's called gun violence or gun control or gun safety or preventing gun violence. There are all different ways to do this.
Protecting the Second Amendment.
The Second Amendment, or deal with violence in schools. But we would like to try to take this on, and part of this is just to build enough trust and relationship, especially amongst those who do not want to see any change in current law, to actually be in a conversation, because we would think everybody's deeply upset to see innocent lives lost, and we have to just figure out how to deal with that. On abortion, I would simply say that when I worked at Search for Common Ground, there was a terrific project that completed maybe 15 years ago or more. And I forgot the exact name of it, but it was something about for life and choice. And it came at a time after there was violence in abortion clinics and other places around the country. And a good friend of mine, Mary Jackstite, ran a wonderful project where they brought together pro-choice and pro-life people. And they didn't try to get them to agree on the issue of abortion. That was an issue of fundamental religious principle. But they got them to talk about teenage pregnancy prevention, foster care, and adoption. And in the process of finding ways to work together on shared goals there, they lowered the temperatures about their distaste for each other and began to see the humanity of each other. So it was a very successful project, and I think made a big difference. I don't know if there's anything going on right now. Again, that project finished probably 15 to 18 years ago by my memory.
Robert, I have a question I'd like to jump in with very quickly. We at Better Angels, noting the fact that there are some differences, obviously, in terms of the precise focus of our respective organizations, but we frequently find ourselves coming up against the criticism that says that we are in a moment right now in American politics and in American history where the sort of wholesale kind of change that many folks on the right and left want to see in our politics is something that necessitates more or less just sort of the utter electoral decimation of the other party. And sometimes we get hit with the criticism that says that by seeking a sort of collaborative or depolarized or what you might refer to as a consensus-oriented process around getting people to engage each other, to discover empathy with each other, but then to work together towards constructive solutions that appeal to value sets on both sides of this divide, that we are in some sense sort of enabling whatever side you think is the bad side's agenda to kind of undermine the country. Do you guys ever find yourself in a position where you have to answer that type of fundamental criticism of the work of consensus building? And if so, how do you tend to deal with that objection?
Great question, tough question. And as usual, if it's a tough question, I try to avoid it. That's how we the criticism we get is, appreciate what you're doing over there. It's very nice, but this isn't a time for this. There's a time to talk. There's a time to fight. This is a time to fight. And I don't have a perfect answer for this, but here's what I'd say, is that you have to live with a both and. David Brooks mentioned us in a column some months ago, and he said, look, while we're all busy fighting, we still have to have a process to put together good ideas. And to be honest, it's a false assumption from my experience that once one party or another gets elected, they're going to have the answers. They still should be talking to other people to generate the best possible solutions, because no one ideology, no one party, no wise person has all the answers. So the methodology we recommend, I think, works no matter what. I also don't think there's any conflict between that and being partisans and fighting for your political beliefs. But one of the things I would love to see is both parties say, you know what, we're so confident of what we believe that we're not afraid to assemble people who disagree with us and have a good conversation and see what comes out of it. Because that would be real leadership from my perspective, not just one side saying we got all the answers. That's my biggest concern. But yes, we're susceptible. I've noticed it in funding organizations and I understand that. Some people feel, and I understand this and relate to it, that fundamental elements of our democracy are at risk. And so people fighting to advocate to protect our democracy, it's really important. And our process could be used potentially to help preserve some democratic principles. But again, you have to have agreed upon goals. And if there are people who don't agree upon those goals, then you have to go to advocacy. One last point I want to make. Among my heroes are Martin Luther King and Mandela and Gandhi. And what I loved about Martin Luther King in particular wasn't that he was just a consensus builder. He wasn't necessarily, he was an advocate. Mm-hmm. And he had to fight for justice at a time where he did not have partners to talk to who really wanted to share his vision of equality for African Americans. But the way he did it, with respect for his enemies, and the way he did not demonize other people, I believe created the kinds of breakthroughs that made that movement successful, but also made us better as a people. So I'm not saying that our approach works ever. There are times when people need to fight and they need to stand up. And I don't want to suggest that we have the answers to everything, but more often than not, there's so many issues that if we only get people who think they disagree intractably to actually talk to each other, they have a lot more in common than they realize. And the tragedy is that they talk past each other or they make assumptions about each other's motives, which don't turn out to be true. So we're working on that. Other people need to work on other things. And I don't think there's any conflict between the notion that there may have to be several things going on at once to make the world a better place.
Indeed. I really appreciate your answer to that question, Robert. It's energizing. And I hope that our members and folks listening and who will watch this interview take to heart the idea that we can collaborate and search out the areas where our values overlap deeply while still holding to the convictions that animate our own particular political or even partisan points of view. And so your organization seems to be a wonderful vehicle for those sorts of energies. And we're very appreciative to be in this space with you. So thank you for that.
Thank you. Well said. I think we need to bring you in to come talk at Convergence, John.
Anytime, man. I'm not doing anything much over here. David will tell you. I just kind of lay around and kick at my feet.
We'd like to get rid of him for some days, you know.
There you go.
We want a mission.
Put me to work.
Right.
Well, Mr. Fersh, yes, we appreciate it. And I think at this time, okay, we're only 5 minutes out. Let's take a few minutes and hear from David again. David, do you have some updates? And thank you, Wendy, by the way, for moderating our Q&A and
Yep.
for delivering the questions gracefully. David, do you have a few updates for us with respect to Better Angels?
I'll just say briefly that the organization continues to grow. I'll give you just a couple of numbers from a week ago. We're now at 7,736 dues-paying members, 24,000 and a few more subscribers. That number is growing. The number of dues-paying members is growing somewhere usually between 50 and 60 a week. Sometimes we get 100 in a week, depending on maybe some local media. But so the organization, we've now had 525 community workshops. On a good week, we'll have 10 or 12. On an average week, we'll have 6 or 7 or 8. So tonight, I'm sure there are a couple going on somewhere. 39 local alliances that are meeting monthly around the country. 60 people volunteering to do what Barbara is doing, to be a state coordinator. 369 trained moderators like Wendy, who are moderating workshops around the country as trained volunteers. 638 organizers, 66 trained debate chairs, 150 media features where we've been the focus of a media story. And my favorite and last number is we have a staff to volunteer ratio today of 1 to 128. That is, for every person who is paid to do something, we have 128 people who are doing the work of the organization as volunteer leaders. And so that, I think of all the numbers, that's what I'm the proudest of. So that's just a little numerical portrait of where we are now. We're thinking about a few ideas for the future. One new idea that's emerged from some of our members is to start a door-to-door canvassing program to, and maybe send people, little groups of people into the opposite color, like if you're from a blue community, you know, like to do the kind of Better Angels way, a door-to-door canvassing idea to identify potential new members. That's an idea we're thinking about and wondering what other people would think about it. We're also looking at the year 2020 and all the challenges and issues that are going on with the national election and how we can lean into that process and participate in it in a strong and good way. So we're looking at things like a Better Angels bus tour across the country on what does it mean to be an American today? What holds us together as a people? There are a couple of other things like that we're looking at that would lead into our 2020 convention, which will be in the late summer in Charlotte, North Carolina. And we have our two wonderful convention co-chairs, one red and one blue, both from North Carolina, and they're working really as we speak to put together a great convention. So that's a little bit of an update, and thank you, and back over to John.
Indeed. Well, thank you so much, David. There's plenty for us all to be excited about. We're looking forward to doing this again next week. We're going to have another wonderful, next month, I should say. We're going to have another wonderful call then. But for now, Barbara Brown, why don't you sing us off the stage?
All right, we're at the top of the hour, and we are very good at keeping our time exactly where we say, sometimes against what the people want, but we end up to respect all people's time. Rob, thank you so much. You were so informative. I think everybody would like to know your website so we can go on and learn more about you and your group. And the one thing that I picked up that really resonates is that it's looking at people with humanity as you go into any project or any trying to do a policy, not going into it disrespectfully. So let's get out of here and help.
Barbara,
Yes.
let me just tell you the website, which is www.convergencepolicy.org. And you are right about the primacy of relationships, about people seeing each other's full humanity.
Thank you so much. And I'll make sure that that gets out on the Better Angel website. So let's all go out and help bring about a more perfect union.